In 1966, railroads across America were in free fall, ridership collapsing, budgets slashed, and the future looked bleak. Then, desperate to prove trains could still lead the race for speed, a handful of shop workers bolted jet engines onto an aging passenger car, unleashing a black streak that shattered United States rail records at 183 miles per hour. This thunderous gamble seemed primed to transform American railroading, but it vanished almost overnight. Why did the country's wildest train vanish into obscurity? And what did its brief explosive run reveal about the fate of an entire industry? In the decades after World War II, the New York Central Railroad watched its passenger business collapse year after year. In 1946, the company carried more than 4.2 billion passenger miles, a figure that seemed untouchable at the time. But as the years rolled on, those numbers fell off a cliff. By 1950, passenger miles had dropped to 2.6 billion. By 1966, the year of the jet train experiment, they had sunk to just 454 million. That's nearly a 90% decline in 2 decades. The story was the same on the balance sheet. In the mid-1940s, passenger trains brought in $112 million a year for the New York Central. By 1965, that revenue had shriveled to $44 million, while losses from running passenger service soared past $46 million annually. For every dollar earned, the railroad spent more than $2 just to keep the trains moving. It wasn't just the New York Central. All across the country, highways and airports were draining away riders. In 1946, railroads hauled about 2/3 of all intercity travelers, but by the late 1960s, that share was down below 10%. Airlines, once a luxury, had overtaken trains in passenger miles by the early 1960s. Cars and buses filled the gap, offering freedom and speed that the old streamliners couldn't match. For the New York Central, the numbers weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. The company's most famous long-haul routes, like the Chicago to New York run, saw ridership dwindle from over 1 million a year to less than 150,000. The railroad was bleeding cash and passengers, and the clock was ticking. In the boardroom and the shops, the sense of urgency was real. Something bold had to be tried, or there might not be a passenger business left to save. Alfred E. Perlman did not hesitate when the idea landed on his desk. The New York Central's president had a reputation for bold moves, and the jet-powered railcar proposal fit the moment. In early 1966, as losses mounted and headlines turned grim, Perlman sent a memo to his board. The company would fund a spectacle, a jet experiment on a shoestring budget. There would be no grand new train, no sprawling research program. Instead, the order was clear: keep it cheap, keep it quick, and make it loud enough that no one could ignore it. Board minutes from that spring show, a rare consensus. The directors approved the use of a surplus Bud RDC-3, a car already gathering dust in the roster, and authorized the purchase of 2 jet engines from a military surplus dealer in Arizona. The total budget, as recorded in the correspondence, was capped at $30,000, barely enough to buy a new diesel locomotive, but just enough for a one-off gamble. Perelman's directive was as much about publicity as engineering. He wanted the public, the press, and Washington to see that railroads could still innovate, even in the face of shrinking budgets and crumbling market share. The experiment would not be a secret. Every step, from the arrival of the jet pod at Collinwood to the first test run, was meant to draw eyes back to the rails. With the green light given, the Collinwood Technical Center got to work. The timeline was tight, the money even tighter, but the mandate was unmistakable, proved that American railroads could still surprise the world. The Collinwood Technical Center ran on adrenaline and thrift. The order from above was clear: get a jet-powered railcar ready for the spotlight and do it fast. Shop foremen huddled around parts lists and wall calendars, counting backwards from the date circled in red. They had just 3 weeks, 21 days, to turn a tired RDC-3 into a headline grabber. Every day counted. Sourcing the heart of the project meant calling in favors and scouring military surplus catalogs. 2 General Electric J-47 jet engines, veterans of a Convair B-36 bomber, waited in the Arizona sun at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The price was $5,000 for the pair, a fraction of what a new locomotive would chuck. The engines were loaded onto a flatbed and shipped east, their fate now tied to a commuter car that had spent more time in storage than on the rails. Inside Collinwood, the pace was relentless. Crew chiefs swapped overtime for coffee and kept the shop humming late into the night. The jet pod's arrival turned heads. Some men joked about strapping it to a Buick. Others just stared at the size of the thing. The first job was figuring out how to mount the engines on the roof of the RDC-3 without tearing the car apart. Welders and machinists measured, cut, and reinforced, improvising as they went. No one had ever tried anything like this on a budget this tight. The shop floor logbooks from June and July 1966 read like a race against time. Seats came out to make way for new supports. Fuel lines and tanks were scavenged from the yard and modified to feed the jets with diesel. Every part was either reused, borrowed, or built on the fly. Instrument racks piled up in the baggage section, waiting for the next round of wiring. Shop foremen kept the crew focused, reminding them there would be no second chance if they missed the deadline. In just 3 weeks, the Black Beetle was taking shape, not in some high-tech lab, but in a railroad shop that knew how to stretch every dollar and every hour. A commuter car built for 50 miles per hour runs was never meant to wear a jet pod, but the Collinwood crew had other ideas. With the engines still somewhere between Arizona and Ohio, the first order of business was clearing out the front of the RDC. Rows of passenger seats came out, making room for a lattice of steel beams that would anchor the jet pod to the roof. These beams didn't just sit on top, they punched right through the ceiling, tied into the car's frame, and spread the load across the entire front end. Welders and fitters worked off sketches and back-of-the-envelope calculations, measuring twice and cutting once because there was no time for do-overs. The jet pod itself was massive, a leftover from a B-36 bomber, and it didn't fit the RDC's lines at all. Ruth Wetzel, a commercial artist and the project lead's wife, sketched out a fairing that would smooth the airflow around the engines and give the car a nose like nothing else on the rails. The shop built it up from aluminum and fiberglass, stretching nearly 6 feet in front of the original cab. The fairing wasn't just for looks. Wind tunnel models showed it would keep the nose glued to the rails at speed and, as one machinist put it, help keep the bugs out of the instruments. Inside, the baggage section became a maze of wires, gauges, and racks. Over 50 sensors tracked everything from stress on the new supports to the temperature of the jet exhaust. Fuel lines, armored and bent by hand, snaked from new tanks in the mail compartment up to the pod. The original diesel engines stayed on board to power the brakes and lights, but the drive shafts were uncoupled. Once the jets fired, the wheels would spin free, pushed by pure thrust. Shop notes mentioned plenty of quick fixes. Heat shielding went up wherever the exhaust might scorch the roof. Some controls were improvised, and the startup sequence for the jets involved more than a little faith. But in 3 weeks, what rolled out of Collinwood was part railcar, part rocket sled, a machine born from thrift, caffeine, and a willingness to make it up as they went along. The Black Beetle began life as a Budd RD-3, a self-propelled rail car built for commuter service. Before the jets, it measured 85 feet from end to end and weighed just under 50 tons. The original Detroit diesel engines, 2 6-cylinder units, each rated at 275 horsepower, sat beneath the floor, driving the wheels through a conventional transmission. That setup was good for a top speed of 85 miles per hour, respectable for its day, but nowhere near the territory the project aimed to reach. Everything changed when the jet pod arrived from Arizona. The team at Collinwood mounted 2 General Electric J47 GE-19 turbojets, each rated for 5,200 pounds of thrust on a custom pylon above the front end. The pod, once slung beneath the wing of a B-36 bomber, now sat inverted atop the RDC, angled 5 degrees with the nose down to generate extra downforce at speed. The aerodynamic fairing, built from aluminum and fiberglass, stretched the car to 90 feet 7 inches. With the pod, fairing, and new support structure, the Black Beetle tipped the scales at 51 tons. The original diesel engines stayed on board, but their only job was to run the brakes, lights, and auxiliary systems. The drive shafts were uncoupled, and once the jets fired, the wheels spun free, pushed by raw thrust alone. New fuel tanks plumbed for diesel instead of jet fuel were installed in the mail compartment, feeding the jets through armored lines that snaked up to the pod. The car's center of gravity shifted forward, and the added weight over the front truck demanded a careful balance between stability and speed. Inside, the baggage section became a nerve center. Over 50 sensors and instruments tracked every critical parameter: speed, acceleration, frame stress, ride quality, temperatures, and vibration. Custom racks held oscillographs, strain gauges, and accelerometers, their wires running along the walls and under the floor. The team monitored real-time data from every run, hunting for early warnings of trouble and proof that the car could survive the forces unleashed at 180 miles per hour. Every modification, from the fairing's wind tunnel profile to the smallest heat shield, was aimed at one goal: pushing a commuter car far beyond its original limits without a single wasted dollar or day. The final product was a machine that looked like a science experiment, but whose numbers for length, weight, thrust, and sensor count spoke the language of serious engineering. Long before the jet engines roared to life, New York Central engineers chose a 68-mile corridor between Butler, Indiana, and Stryker, Ohio, for the M47's test. This stretch, straight, level, and isolated, offered the best chance for a clean run. Maintenance crews worked through the night, tamping ballast, tightening spikes, and replacing any suspect tie or plate. Inspectors walked every mile, eyes on the rails for cracks or sunken joints. Most of the track was 127-pound jointed steel, with welded rail in the most vulnerable sections. Every detail was logged, every repair signed off by C.T. Pompa, the Vice President of Engineering, who understood that at 180 miles per hour, the smallest flaw could be catastrophic. Safety and data accuracy were inseparable. Near milepost 352, just outside Bryan, Ohio, engineers installed 2 electronic speed traps, each 300 feet long. Surveyors marked the traps to within fractions of an inch. Each was fitted with crystal-controlled timers and photoelectric beams, triggered by the M47's wheels. Redundant timing systems ran side by side, ensuring a backup if one failed. Official observers from the railroad and outside agencies watched every step, prepared to certify the results. Inside the baggage compartment, the car became a mobile lab. Over 50 sensors and instruments tracked the run, strain gauges on the frame and jet mounts, accelerometers for vibration, and thermocouples monitoring temperatures from jet exhaust to generator radiators. Speed was measured by axle chronographs, electronic pickups, and radio telemetry. Oscillographs and chart recorders captured every second for later analysis. Engineers monitored the readouts, ready to flag any spike in stress or vibration. A Beechcraft Model 18 flew ahead, scanning the line for obstacles and relaying updates by radio. Dispatchers cleared all other traffic, creating a window for the jet car to run without risk. Every element, track, timing, instrumentation, air, and ground safety was documented and checked. The protocol left nothing to chance. The data would be credible, precise, and above all, safe. On July 23, 1966, the M47 thundered down the Butler to Stryker main line, the roar of its twin J-47 jet engines echoing across the Ohio flatlands. In the baggage compartment, engineers crowded over instrument panels, eyes locked on dials and paper chart recorders. As the Black Beetle entered the twin speed traps near milepost 352, every sensor and timer was live. The car flashed through the first beam, then the second, barely a second apart. When the trap tapes were collected and the numbers checked, the result was undeniable: 183.68 miles per hour, officially clocked and verified by redundant systems. News of the run spread quickly. Local headlines called it the fastest train in American history. National wire services picked up the story, running photos of the jet car streaking past farm fields, shock wave trailing in its wake. For a brief moment, the Black Beetle was front-page news. On board, the atmosphere was electric. Donald Wetzel, the project lead, later described the sensation as a mix of exhilaration and disbelief, feeling the car surge past 180 miles per hour, the instrumentation confirming what the seat of his pants already knew. The engineers, many of whom had spent their careers chasing incremental improvements, now had proof in hand. A U.S. rail vehicle had broken the 180 miles per hour barrier, not in a lab, but on real Midwestern track. The achievement was more than a number. It was a statement captured in the trap tapes and the headlines that American railroading could still deliver a spectacle worthy of the jet age. Inside New York Central's boardroom, the excitement of the record run faded as engineers laid out the hard numbers. The M47's brakes, designed for commuter speeds, could not safely stop a jet-powered railcar from 180 miles per hour. Emergency stopping distances stretched far beyond anything seen in regular service. Internal safety assessments flagged the risk. On a public main line, there was no room for error. Cost memos circulated among executives, breaking down what it would take to make high-speed rail more than a one-off stunt. Upgrading even a single corridor to withstand the pounding of jet-driven runs meant new rail, reinforced ballast, and constant inspection. The Butler to Stryker stretch alone had required weeks of round-the-clock work just to prepare for 2 days of tests. Extending those standards across the system would run into the millions, money the railroad simply did not have. Engineers reported that the lightweight RDC frame, never meant for such speeds, showed signs of stress after only a handful of runs. Ride quality at 180 miles per hour was rough, with vibration and hunting oscillations that pushed suspension and wheel-rail contact to their limits. Track inspections after the tests revealed fresh wear and minor deformation even on the straight upgraded line. The data spelled out a reality that no amount of publicity could change. The Black Beetle could go fast, but not safely, not repeatedly, and certainly not cheaply. In the end, the decision came down to more than just technical hurdles. Internal reports warned that the cost of making jet speed routine, upgrading tracks, overhauling signaling, retraining crews would outweigh any short-term gains. Regulators and insurers raised questions about safety, and there was no appetite for a broader rollout. The M497 was quietly retired from the spotlight, its jet pod removed, and the experiment filed away as both a triumph and a cautionary tale. American tracks still hold the record set by that jet-powered experiment at 183.68 miles per hour. While other nations invest billions in high-speed rail, the United States hesitates, debating the cost of ambition. The Black Beetle proved that speed is possible, even with off-the-shelf parts. What's missing isn't technology, it's the will to build for the future. Thanks for riding along. Share your thoughts below.